6 months later, Marcus Rivera sat in the front row of federal district court, watching Karen Whitmore's defense attorney paint his would-be murderer as a victim. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Attorney Vincent Carlisle said with practiced sincerity, "my client is a 62-year-old widow who suffered a complete mental breakdown following the traumatic death of her husband. What happened to the Rivera family was wrong, absolutely wrong, but it wasn't the calculated act of a criminal mastermind. It was the desperate action of a woman whose grief had driven her temporarily insane." Marcus felt Elena's hand tighten in his as Carlisle continued his opening statement. They'd been warned this would happen, that Karen's lawyers would use her husband's death from cancer 2 years earlier as justification for everything she'd done. "My client owned her home for 37 years, Carlisle continued. "She raised her children there, cared for her dying husband there, buried him from that house. When she discovered that her new neighbor's pool encroached on her property, the last tangible connection to her deceased husband, she snapped. Not criminally, not with malice, but with the desperate irrationality of someone drowning in grief." It was a compelling narrative, Marcus had to admit. Karen sat at the defense table wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a conservative bun, her makeup minimal. She looked like exactly what Carlisle claimed she was, a grieving widow who'd lost her way. The only problem was that none of it was true. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Martinez stood to deliver the prosecution's opening, and her first words cut through Carlisle's sympathy play like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, grief is not a license to commit attempted murder." She walked to the evidence table and held up a thick binder. "Over the next 5 days, you're going to hear recordings of the defendant planning to burn down a house with a family sleeping inside. You're going to see photographs of illegal surveillance conducted on an 8-year-old child. You're going to learn about a systematic campaign of harassment that included filing false reports with 7 different government agencies." Martinez moved closer to the jury box. "Defense counsel wants you to believe that Mrs. Whitmore's actions were the result of temporary insanity brought on by grief. But the evidence will show you something very different. It will show you a woman who spent months meticulously planning the destruction of a family, whose only crime was building a swimming pool on their own property." She returned to the evidence table and picked up a single sheet of paper. "This is Mrs. Whitmore's browser history from her home computer, recovered by FBI forensic specialists. 3 weeks before she poured concrete into the Rivera family's pool, she searched for how to make neighbor move away, legal ways to force property disputes, and how to file false police reports without getting caught." Marcus watched the jury's faces change as the premeditation became clear. 2 weeks before the attempted arson, Martinez continued, "She searched for accelerants that don't leave evidence, house fires that look accidental, and statute of limitations on attempted murder." She let that sink in before delivering her conclusion. This was not a grief-stricken widow acting irrationally. This was a calculated predator who decided that her neighbor's race and ethnicity made them acceptable targets for a campaign of terror. And when that campaign failed to drive them away, she decided to kill them. The first day of testimony belonged to the technical evidence, the surveillance footage, the audio recordings, the forensic analysis of the gasoline and timer device. It was methodical, precise, and devastating. Detective Morrison walked the jury through Karen's escalation timeline, showing how each incident built on the previous one. Judge Chen testified about what he'd witnessed, his judicial authority lending weight to every word. But the most powerful moment came when Eddie Moreau, the concrete truck driver, took the stand. "She told me it was her pool," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She looked me right in the eye and said she was filling in her own pool for safety reasons. I trusted her. I helped her destroy that family's property because I believed her lie." The second day brought Dale Kruger, the private investigator who'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the scope of Karen's surveillance operation and the depth of her obsession with the Rivera family. "She wanted everything," Kruger testified. "Bank records, employment history, immigration status, school records for the kid, medical records, criminal background checks. She said she was going to expose them for what they really were." "And what did your investigation reveal about the Rivera family?" Martinez asked. Kruger looked directly at Marcus as he answered. "That they were exactly what they appeared to be. Hard-working, law-abiding people who paid their taxes, loved their daughter, and helped their neighbors. There was nothing to expose because there was nothing wrong." The third day was when Karen's defense began to crumble. Carlisle had planned to call character witnesses who would testify to Karen's previous good nature and the devastating impact of her husband's death. Martinez's cross-examinations revealed a different pattern. Karen's former neighbor from her previous address testified that she'd called the police on the Hispanic family next door 14 times for suspicious activity that turned out to be birthday parties and family gatherings. A store clerk testified that Karen had accused him of shortchanging her and demanded to speak to someone who speaks English, despite his clear accent-free speech. Her own sister reluctantly admitted that Karen had always harbored racist views, but had learned to keep them hidden in public. By the fourth day, the defense's strategy had shifted from temporary insanity to outright denial. "Mrs. Whitmore," Carlisle said as he questioned his own client, Did you pour concrete into the Rivera family's pool? I poured concrete onto my own property, Karen replied, her voice steady and defiant. That pool was built illegally on my land. I had every right to fill it in, and the gasoline found on the Rivera property. I was planning to do some controlled burning on my land. I had no intention of harming anyone. It was a disastrous performance. Karen's continued insistence that she'd done nothing wrong, combined with her obvious hatred for the Rivera family, destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. Martinez's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Whitmore, you testified that the pool was on your property, but you've seen the official county survey showing it was entirely within the Rivera property boundaries, correct? That survey was forged? By whom? By Mr. Rivera and his construction industry connections. Are you alleging that county officials were part of this conspiracy? I'm saying that people like him know how to work the system. People like him? What do you mean by that, Mrs. Whitmore? The courtroom fell silent. Karen's lawyer had coached her extensively on avoiding racial language, but under pressure, her true feelings emerged. I mean contractors, she said unconvincingly. Construction people, not Hispanic people. I never said anything about his race. Martinez approached the evidence table and picked up a transcript. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm reading from the recording made by Mr. Kruger. Your exact words were, these people think they can come into our neighborhoods and do whatever they want. Build illegal pools, forge documents, turn the whole place into some kind of barrio. Those are your words, correct? Karen's face flushed red. I was referring to contractors in general. You used the word barrio, Mrs. Whitmore. That's a Spanish word referring to Hispanic neighborhoods. Were you talking about contractors in general, or were you talking about Hispanic people specifically? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I'll ask again, Mrs. Whitmore. When you said you didn't want your neighborhood turned into some kind of bay, were you referring to Mr. Rivera's ethnicity? Karen's composure finally cracked. I was just trying to protect my property. They had no right. No right to build on my land and then act like I was the problem. Even though the pool wasn't on your land, it was on my land. Even though every official survey confirms it wasn't. Those surveys are wrong. Even though a retired federal judge confirmed a pool's location, he's biased. They're all biased against me. Martinez let the outburst settle before asking her final question. Mrs. Whitmore, when you brought gasoline and ignition devices to the Rivera property at midnight, what exactly were you planning to do? Karen's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Asked and answered. Overruled. Judge Patricia Hawthorne said quietly. The witness will answer. Karen stared at Martinez with pure hatred. I was protecting my property. By burning down their house, I never intended to hurt anyone. But you brought gasoline and a timer to their house at midnight? I was going to do controlled burning on the disputed area. The disputed area that was actually their pool deck, where their 8-year-old daughter plays every day. Karen's voice broke. I just wanted them gone. I wanted my life back. The courtroom was dead silent. Karen had finally told the truth, and it was exactly as ugly as everyone had suspected. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts? The foreman announced. Karen's face went white as the judge read through the convictions. Attempted arson. The sledgehammer crashed into the concrete as Sarah demolished her own pool. But she never expected her neighbor Karen to call the police with a lie that would backfire spectacularly. What started as a simple home renovation became a neighborhood war that exposed dark secrets, shattered friendships, and ended with handcuffs clicking in the most unexpected way. This is the story of how removing a pool led to removing a problem neighbor forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah Mitchell's backyard as she stood at the edge of her kidney-shaped swimming pool, sledgehammer in hand. The pool had been a dream once back when she and David were married, back when they'd hosted summer barbecues and their daughter Emma had learned to swim in its shallow end. Now, it was just a concrete reminder of a life that no longer existed. You sure about this, Mom? Emma's voice carried across the yard. At 16, she had her father's practical nature and her mother's stubborn streak. It seems like a lot of work just to spite Dad. Sarah adjusted her grip on the sledgehammer. This isn't about your father, sweetheart. This is about moving forward. The truth was more complicated. The pool had become a money pit expensive to maintain, impossible to heat efficiently, and a liability she couldn't afford on her teacher's salary. The divorce settlement had left her with the house, but not the means to maintain its luxuries. She'd gotten quotes from pool removal companies, but $20,000 might as well have been $20 million. Besides, Sarah added, raising the sledgehammer above her head, I've been wanting to do some therapeutic demolition for months. The first blow sent a satisfying crack spiderwebbing across the pool's edge. The second blow widened it. By the fifth blow, chunks of concrete were falling into the drained pool with echoing crashes that felt like punctuation marks on her old life. What the hell do you think you're doing? The screech came from the direction of the pristine colonial next door. Karen Pemberton stood at the fence line, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair somehow immune to the morning humidity. her face red with indignation. She wore a tennis outfit that had never seen a tennis court and held her phone like a weapon. Sarah paused mid-swing. Good morning to you too, Karen. Don't you good morning me? You can't just destroy property like that. It's going to affect everyone's home values. Emma rolled her eyes. Here we go. Sarah had lived next to Karen for 8 years, and in that time, Karen had complained about everything from Sarah's choice of mailbox to the height of her grass. Karen seemed to believe she was the unofficial president of Maple Grove Lane, with the authority to approve or disapprove of her neighbor's life choices. It's my property, Karen. I can do what I want with it. Not if it affects the neighborhood. Karen's voice pitched higher. I'm calling the homeowners association. We don't have a homeowners association, Sarah replied, bringing the sledgehammer down again. Another satisfying crack. Karen fumbled with her phone. Then I'm calling the city. There have to be permits for this kind of destruction. Sarah straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead. The morning was already getting hot, and she had a lot of work ahead of her. Karen, with all due respect, mind your own business. This is my business. My property value is tied to this neighborhood looking respectable. Mom, Emma whispered, maybe we should. No. Sarah's voice carried steel. I'm done letting other people dictate how I live my life. She raised the sledgehammer again, but Karen's shriek stopped her. I'm calling the police. Sarah lowered. The tool? For what? Breaking up my own pool on my own property? For disturbing the peace. And probably violating building codes. Emma stepped forward. Mrs. Pemberton, my mom checked with the city. You don't need permits to remove a pool if you're not filling it in or building something else. Karen's face grew redder. I don't care what some teenage girl thinks she knows about city ordinances. Some teenage girl who's taking AP government and actually researched this. Emma shot back. Sarah felt a surge of pride. Her daughter had inherited more than just stubborn streaks. Karen's fingers flew over her phone screen. We'll see about that. Officer Martinez. Yes, this is Karen Pemberton on Maple Grove Lane. I need to report a disturbance. My neighbor is destroying property, and it's creating noise pollution and probably violating all sorts of codes. Sarah watched Karen pace back and forth behind the fence, gesticulating wildly as she spoke to the police dispatcher. This was typical Karen, escalating every minor disagreement into a federal crisis. She's really calling the cops? Emma asked incredulously. Apparently. Sarah shrugged. Let her. I'm not doing anything illegal. 20 minutes later, as Sarah worked methodically on breaking up the pool's coping, a patrol car pulled into her driveway. Officer Martinez emerged, a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd dealt with neighborhood disputes before. Karen materialized instantly, rushing across her perfectly manicured lawn. Officer, thank goodness you're here. She's been making horrible noise all morning, and I'm sure she's violating building codes. Officer Martinez approached the fence. Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez. I understand there's a noise complaint. Sarah set down her sledgehammer and walked over. Good morning, officer. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm removing my pool. At 7:30 in the morning, Karen interjected. It's disturbing the peace. Officer Martinez consulted his notepad. The city noise ordinance allows construction work between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on weekdays. You're within your rights, Mrs. Mitchell. Karen's face fell. But surely there are permits required for this kind of demolition. Actually, Officer Martinez said gently, I checked with code enforcement on my way over. Pool removal doesn't require permits unless you're filling in the space or constructing something new. Mrs. Mitchell is well within her rights. Sarah folded her arms. Thank you, officer, Karen sputtered. But but the noise is legal during permitted hours, Officer Martinez said. I'm sorry, Mrs. Pemberton, but there's no violation here. As the officer walked back to his car, expression shifted from frustrated to calculating. Sarah recognized that look. She'd seen it before, usually right before Karen escalated a situation beyond all reason. This isn't over, Karen said, pointing a manicured finger at Sarah. I'll find something. There's always something. Sarah picked up her sledgehammer, looking forward to it, but as she watched Karen storm back to her house, already pulling out her phone again, Sarah felt a chill despite the rising heat. Karen Pemberton didn't make idle threats. She followed through, and she had a talent for finding people's pressure points. The sledgehammer felt heavier in Sarah's hands as she returned to work, but she forced herself to focus on the rhythm of destruction. Each blow was a step toward freedom from the pool, from the past, from people who thought they could control her choices. She didn't notice Karen on her back deck, phone pressed to her ear, taking photos of Sarah's yard with her zoom function. She didn't see Karen smile as she apparently reached someone important on the other end of her call, but Emma noticed. And as her mother worked with determined intensity, breaking apart concrete that had once represented dreams, Emma watched their neighbor with growing unease. She'd learned in AP government that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who believed they were completely in the right. The sun climbed higher, the work grew harder, and across the fence, Karen Pemberton plotted her next move with the patience of someone who'd turned neighbor harassment into an art form. By noon, Sarah had broken through nearly a quarter of the pool's edge. Her hands were blistered despite her work gloves, her back ached, and sweat stung her eyes, but she felt more accomplished than she had in months. There was something deeply satisfying about physical work, about seeing immediate results from her efforts. Emma brought her water and a sandwich. "You're really going to do this whole thing yourself?" "The important parts," Sarah said, taking a grateful drink. "I'll rent a jackhammer for the deep sections, and I'll need help hauling out the concrete. But yeah, I'm going to do this myself." "Dad would have hired a crew." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Your father had different priorities." Emma was quiet for a moment. "He called last night, after you went to bed." Sarah kept her voice neutral, but her grip tightened on the water bottle. "He wanted to know if you were acting erratically." His words. The water bottle crackled under Sarah's grip. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him you were acting like someone who finally decided to take control of her own life." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, but Mom, .. He seemed really concerned, like worried concerned, not just curious concerned. Before Sarah could respond, Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "That's weird." "What?" "Text from Jenna next door. She says there's some official-looking car in our driveway." Sarah looked toward the front of the house and saw a black sedan with government plates. Her stomach dropped. "Stay here." She walked around to the front yard, still carrying her sledgehammer, and found a woman in a gray suit standing beside the sedan. The woman was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and the sort of authoritative posture that suggested she was used to being taken seriously. The words Child Protective Services hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled, and for a moment, the only sound she could hear was her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "Linda." Walsh's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes weren't unkind. "We received a report expressing concern about your daughter's welfare. May I come inside so we can discuss this privately?" Sarah's mind raced. A report? Someone had called CPS on her. Her eyes automatically went to Karen's house, where she could see a curtain twitch in an upstairs window. "Of course," Sarah managed. "Emma, come inside, please." Emma appeared around the corner of the house, took one look at the CPS worker, and went pale. "Mom, it's okay, sweetheart. Let's just go inside and clear this up." But Sarah's hands were shaking as she unlocked the front door. Nothing about this felt like something that could be easily cleared up. Linda Walsh declined coffee but accepted a glass of water as they settled in the living room. Emma sat close to her mother on the couch, and Sarah could feel her daughter's tension radiating like heat. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want to be clear that this is an initial assessment based on a report we received. We're required to investigate all reports involving minors." "What kind of report?" Sarah's teacher voice, kicked in calm, measured, professional. Walsh consulted her tablet. The caller expressed concern about what they described as erratic and potentially dangerous behavior by the primary caregiver. They mentioned destruction of property, emotional instability, and possible endangerment of the minor child. Emma shot to her feet. "That's completely Emma." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Let me handle this." Walsh looked at Emma with the practiced eye of someone who'd interviewed thousands of children. "Emma, is it? I'd like to speak with you privately in a few minutes, if that's okay." "Whatever you want to know, you can ask in front of my mom," Emma said, crossing her arms. Sarah felt a surge of fierce love for her daughter, even as dread continued to churn in her stomach. "Mrs. Mitchell," Walsh continued, "can you tell me about the property destruction the caller mentioned?" "I'm removing my swimming pool. On my own property, with proper research into city ordinances and permits." The caller suggested this was impulsive behavior, possibly related to your recent divorce. Sarah's temper flared. "My divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I've been planning the pool removal for 3 months. I researched contractors, got quotes, and decided to do the work myself to save money. That's not impulsive, that's practical." Walsh made notes on her tablet. "Have there been any incidents involving your daughter's safety during this work?" "No. Emma helps sometimes, but she stays well away from the actual demolition. I've been very careful about safety protocols." The caller also mentioned concerns about your emotional state. They suggested you might be struggling with depression or other mental health issues that could affect your parenting. Emma stood up so quickly, her water glass rattled on the coffee table. "Okay, I'm done being polite. Who called you?" "Emma, I can't reveal. It was Mrs. Pemberton, wasn't it? Our neighbor. She's been harassing my mom for months. Ever since the divorce, she's been acting like mom is some kind of criminal for existing." Walsh's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something recognition. "Maybe." "Mrs. Mitchell, are you currently receiving any mental health treatment?" Sarah's jaw clenched. The question felt invasive, insulting, but she forced herself to answer calmly. "I saw a counselor during my divorce proceedings, Dr. Rebecca Chen. She can verify that I'm mentally stable and fully capable of caring for my daughter. I'll need her contact information." As Sarah provided the details, she caught Emma watching her with a mixture of admiration and worry. Her daughter was seeing her navigate this crisis with composure, but Sarah knew Emma could also see the fear beneath the surface. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'd like to take a look around the house. if you don't mind, and then I'd like to speak with Emma privately." The house tour felt surreal. Sarah watched a stranger evaluate her home through the lens of child endangerment, mentally cataloging every minor flaw. The loose bathroom doorknob became a safety hazard. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter became evidence of financial stress. The family photos that still included David became reminders of a broken home. But Walsh seemed satisfied with what she saw. The house was clean, well-maintained, and clearly a loving home. Emma's room was typical teenager, organized chaos, but not neglected. "Now, Emma, could we have that private conversation?" Sarah's stomach clenched, but she nodded. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." Sitting alone at her kitchen table, Sarah stared out the window at her half-demolished pool and tried not to imagine the worst-case scenarios. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the living room, but couldn't make out words. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When Walsh and Emma returned to the kitchen, Emma looked angry and Walsh looked thoughtful. "Mrs. Mitchell, based on my assessment, I don't see any evidence of neglect or endangerment. Your daughter is clearly well cared for, your home is safe and appropriate, and Emma speaks very highly of your parenting." Sarah felt her knees go weak. With relief, however, Walsh continued, "I am required to document this report and maintain an open file for 30 days. If we receive additional reports during that time, we'll need to investigate further." The relief evaporated. "Additional reports. It's standard procedure. I'll be contacting your daughter's school counselor and your therapist to verify Emma's well-being. If everything checks out, which I expect it will, the file will be closed with no action needed." After Walsh left, Sarah and Emma sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "Mom," Emma finally said, "Mrs. Pemberton took pictures while you were working this morning. I saw her." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "That manipulative, and she's been talking to Dad." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What?" "I heard her on the phone yesterday when I was getting the mail. She was talking to someone about how concerned she was about you, and she mentioned Dad by name. Said something about David's poor daughter and how divorce makes some women completely unstable." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Karen hadn't just called CPS on a whim. She'd orchestrated this. She'd probably been building a case, taking photos, documenting Sarah's erratic behavior. Maybe she'd even coordinated with David. Sarah's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer it," Emma said quickly, but Sarah was already swiping to accept. "What do you want, David?" "Sarah, I just got the most disturbing phone call from CPS. They said someone reported you for endangering Emma." His voice carried that familiar tone of concerned authority that had once made her feel protected and now made her feel patronized. "Been handled. Emma's fine. I'm fine. We're both fine. Are you though, Sarah? I've been hearing things. About you tearing up the backyard? Acting erratically from who? Karen Pemberton?" A pause. "She's concerned about you. About Emma. She's a manipulative busybody who called CPS because I wouldn't let her control my landscaping choices." "Sarah, listen to yourself. You're getting hysterical, I'm getting angry. There's a difference. Maybe Emma should stay with me for a while. Just until you get your head straight." The words hit Sarah like a slap. "Absolutely not. I'm not trying to be the bad guy here, but if CPS is involved, CPS found no problems. None. Emma is staying right here." "Sarah," she hung up. Emma was watching her with wide eyes. "He wants me to come stay with him, over my dead body." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the walls closing in. Karen had been more devious than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about noise complaints or property values. This was psychological warfare, designed to undermine Sarah's confidence, her parenting, her stability, and it was working. Despite CPS finding no issues, despite Emma's obvious well-being, Sarah could feel doubt creeping in. Was she being reckless? Was she putting her anger at David and Karen ahead of Emma's best interests? "Mom," Emma's voice was firm. "You're spiraling. Stop." Sarah looked at her 16-year-old daughter, poised, intelligent, fiercely loyal. Realized Emma was right. "You're not crazy," Emma continued. "You're not endangering me. You're not being erratic. You're being human. And Mrs. Pemberton is a psychopath who apparently has way too much time on her hands." Sarah managed a shaky laugh. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." They hugged, and Sarah felt some of her strength return. But as she looked out the kitchen window toward Karen's house, she saw her neighbor standing on her back deck. Phone pressed to her ear once again. This wasn't over. Karen had played her first major card and it hadn't worked. But Sarah had a sinking feeling that there were more cards to come. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "what if she calls CPS again?" "What if she lies next time?" Sarah's jaw set with determination. "Then we'll be ready for her." But privately, Sarah wondered what other weapons Karen might have in her arsenal, and whether Sarah was strong enough to withstand a prolonged assault on her life, her parenting, and her sanity, as if summoned by her thoughts. Sarah's phone buzzed, with a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. Remove the pool, and I'll remove the complaints. Your choice." Sarah showed the text to Emma, whose face went white. "Mom, that's extortion." Sarah stared at the message, feeling a cold Part 3. Sarah screenshot the threatening text message with hands that had stopped shaking. The cold fury burning in her chest had crystallized into something sharper, more focused. Karen had crossed a line from neighborhood harassment into actual, criminal behavior. "Emma, I need you to do something for me. Go to your room and write down everything you can remember about Mrs. Pemberton's behavior over the past few months. Dates, times, what she said, everything. Mom, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense." While Emma worked on documenting Karen's harassment campaign, Sarah called her divorce attorney, Margaret Hendricks. Margaret was expensive, but she was also ruthless and had guided Sarah through David's attempts to manipulate the settlement. "Sarah, how are you holding up, Margaret? I need advice. My neighbor just sent me what I think is an extortion text." Sarah read the message aloud and explained the CPS situation. Margaret's silence on the other end was telling. "Forward me that text. Immediately," Margaret finally said. "And Sarah, don't respond to it. Don't engage with her at all. Document everything, but don't give her any ammunition. What can we do legally? Extortion is a felony. Harassment, filing false reports, we might have several angles here, but I need to see all your documentation first." After hanging up, Sarah felt more centered than she had all day. She had a plan. She had legal backing, and most importantly, she had evidence. Her phone rang again. David's name flashed on the screen. "Sarah, we need to talk, face to face." "We really don't. I'm coming over." "Don't you dare." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, David's pristine BMW pulled into her driveway. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as her ex-husband climbed out, his movements tense with barely controlled frustration. He looked exactly the same as he had 6 months ago. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of confident posture that came from never having to doubt his own authority. But Sarah wasn't the same woman who had signed those divorce papers. 6 months of independence had changed her in ways she was still discovering. David knocked on the front door. Sarah took a deep breath and opened it, but didn't invite him in. "We need to discuss Emma's living situation," he said without preamble. "No, we don't. Sarah, be reasonable. You have CPS investigating you." Had past tense. "They found no issues, because there are no issues." David's jaw tightened. "Karen is genuinely concerned about Emma's welfare. Karen is genuinely insane. You're being paranoid." Sarah held up her phone, showing him the extortion text. David's face went pale as he read it. Double quotes. She sent this to you. Shocked that your new ally might not be the concerned neighbor she pretends to be." David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah recognized from their marriage. He did it when his carefully constructed worldview was being challenged. "Sarah, I had no idea she would what? Go too far." "David, she called Child Protective Services and filed a false report because I'm removing my own pool." "How far did you think she'd go?" "I thought she was just concerned. You thought she was useful. You thought having a neighbor complain about my erratic behavior would support your case if you decided you wanted custody." The accusation hung in the air between them. David's silence was confirmation enough. "Dad?" They both turned to see Emma, standing in the doorway, her face carefully neutral in the way teenagers perfected when they were furious but trying to appear mature. "Emma, sweetheart." David's voice softened. "I was just talking to your mother about you maybe spending some time with me while she sorts through this pool situation." I heard Emma's voice was ice cold. "I also heard you talking to Mrs. Pemberton yesterday when you came to pick up my textbooks." David's face flushed. "Emma, you told her you were concerned about my mother's judgment and that you appreciated her keeping an eye on the situation. Did you know she was planning to call CPS? Of course not, but you would have been happy if it worked out in your favor, right?" Sarah felt a surge of pride at her daughter's directness. Emma had inherited David's analytical mind, but none of his willingness to manipulate situations to his advantage. "Emma, that's not fair." "Fair? Dad, you know what's not fair? Having CPS show up at my house because some psycho neighbor thinks she gets to control how we live? You know what else isn't fair? Finding out my own father encouraged that psycho." David looked genuinely stricken. "Emma, I would never." "Yes, you would. And you did." Emma's voice cracked slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm not coming to stay with you. I'm not leaving Mom. And if you try to use this CPS thing against her in court, I'll tell the judge exactly what kind of person you really are." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving David standing on the doorstep looking like he'd been slapped. "She calmed down," he said quietly. "No, she won't, and she shouldn't." Sarah started to close the door, then paused. "David, for what it's worth, I think you genuinely believed you were doing the right thing, but you chose the wrong ally. Karen Pemberton isn't concerned about Emma's welfare. She's a predator who gets off on controlling other people's lives." After David left, Sarah found Emma in her room, furiously typing on her laptop. "What are you working on?" "Research. I'm documenting every interaction we've had with Mrs. Pemberton since the divorce, and I'm looking up the legal definitions of harassment and extortion." Sarah sat on the edge of Emma's bed. "Sweetheart, I appreciate your help, but you don't need to." "Yes, I do. She came after you, but she used me as the weapon. She filed a false report claiming you were endangering me. That makes this my fight too. Emma's fingers flew over the keyboard. Did you know she called the school last week? Ms. Rodriguez mentioned it to me today. Mrs. Pemberton told them. She was concerned about changes in my behavior at home and asked if they'd noticed anything unusual about me. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did Ms. Rodriguez say? She told Mrs. Pemberton that she wasn't authorized to discuss students with non-family members, and that if there were concerns about my welfare, they should be directed to you or Dad. Emma looked up from her laptop. But Mom, she's been building a case. This isn't random harassment. This is systematic. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Karen hadn't just called CPS on impulse. She'd been laying groundwork, creating a paper trail, building a narrative of Sarah as an unfit mother. There's more, Emma said quietly. I talked to some of the other kids in the neighborhood. Mrs. Pemberton has been asking questions. About you, about us. She asked Danny Morrison if he'd ever seen you drinking during the day. She asked the Henderson twins if they'd heard us fighting. Sarah felt nauseated. Emma, she's been stalking us, Mom, for months. And when the pool thing started, she saw her chance to make her move. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. TikTok, Sarah. How long before I find something that sticks? This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She forwarded the text to Margaret Hendricks with a message. She's escalating. What's our next move? Margaret's response came within minutes. Come to my office first thing tomorrow. Bring Emma and all your documentation. We're filing a police report. As Sarah and Emma spent the evening compiling their evidence, they could see Karen through the window, pacing on her back deck with her phone glued to her ear. Whatever she was planning next, she was planning it now. Mom, Emma said around midnight, as they finally closed the laptop full of documented harassment, what if she tries to hurt us? Like really hurt us? Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Someone who would file false reports with CPS and send extortion texts wasn't operating within normal behavioral boundaries. We're going to be very careful, and very smart, and we're going to trust the system to work. But as Sarah lay awake that night, listening to every creak and settling sound in the house, she wondered if the system would work fast enough. Karen Pemberton had shown she was willing to escalate, and people who felt cornered often made desperate choices. At 3 a.m., Sarah got up to check the locks and found Emma in the kitchen, looking out the back window. She's still awake, Emma whispered. Her lights are on, and I saw her shadow moving around. Sarah looked across the yard at Karen's house. Every light blazed, and they could see Karen's silhouette pacing back and forth in her living room. She's panicking, Sarah realized. She expected the CPS thing to work. Now she's trapped between escalating further or backing down, and she doesn't know how to back down. That's what makes her dangerous, isn't it? Sarah put her arm around her daughter. That's what makes her predictable. Dangerous people who can't back down always make the same mistake. What mistake? They go too far. And when they go too far, they finally give everyone else the ammunition they need to stop them. As if on cue, they heard the sound of Karen's back door slamming. Through the window, they watched Karen march across her yard toward their fence, carrying something in her hands. Mom, Emma whispered, she's got bolt cutters. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she watched Karen approach their fence with obvious criminal intent. But instead of panic, she felt something else entirely. Relief. Finally, Karen Pemberton was about to hand them exactly what they needed to end this war once and for all. Double quotes, Emma, go get my phone and start recording. Karen's about to make the biggest mistake of her life.